Hey, my name is Ezra Cohen from Sunday Screens, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use Resolume and why I believe every church should be using this powerful software in your services. I'm going to do this preacher style with 3 C's, and those are creativity, connection, and control. The beauty of Resolume is that it combines live playback with tools like layering, blending modes, and even special effects. A lot of people think that you have to pick ProPresenter or Resolume, but the amazing thing is that these softwares actually perfectly integrate. You can even connect things like external cameras, video sources, and again, get all of that live playback and special effects that I was talking about in the creativity. And number 3, control. You can use tools like a MIDI controller to gradually fade and layer your visuals throughout a worship service instead of having to create these hard cuts like you would in other softwares. If you want to play along as I go through this tutorial, you can actually download Resolume for free, and it will have a watermark on it, but it has all of the full capabilities that you'll see here today. And if you're interested in any of the visuals that we put on the screen and play with here in Resolume, they're all available at sundayscreens.com. You can download a free sample pack today where you get 5 free worship backgrounds to use at your services. All right, so if you have never used Resolume before, we're just going to kind of give you a brief overview of the entire software here, help you kind of navigate things, and then we can go deeper into each one of these areas as we go. But right off the bat, you're kind of going to see a few different things, and this top bit with all of these layers is kind of one of the most important parts of the software. So here you can see that things are organized by layers or rows going horizontally, as well as columns going vertically. And I'm just going to kind of click through to kind of give you a taste of the capability of how those things work. So for example, if I were to click on column 3, you can see that both this first layer and second layer in this column are both triggered at the same time. But what we have on the left here are these faders that when I toggle these up and down or fade these up and down, you can see that layer 2 only is being adjusted while layer 1 stays on, or vice versa. I could just turn down layer 1. Now remember, we can actually take these parameters and attach them to a MIDI controller, which I'm going to show you later, but you can see sort of all the creative possibilities that come from being able to blend things right off the bat. You'll also notice on the left-hand side here, we have these blending modes. So if you open this up, we're currently set to 50 Lighten, which is sort of the first blending mode that I would recommend you using. But there's a ton of different blending modes that we'll get into further later that give you a lot of creative possibilities depending on the parameters of each clip that you're using. Over here, we also have this X and B and S on each layer. X essentially allows you to clear the contents of a layer. B allows you to bypass a layer. So if that was back on, we'd be just bypassing that layer on and off like that. And then S allows you to solo that layer and just play the contents of that layer. You also have a clear and bypass button here at the composition level, the very, very top left, where if I hit this X, it's going to clear the entire composition, and then I can trigger other things after that. Or I can just hit bypass, which will allow me to bring it back on and on without having to re-trigger at the column level. Another thing about this area that's cool is that even though I'm triggering this entire column by hitting the column button here, when things are separated into different layers, I can actually combine different elements from different layers just by clicking on them down here. I can have this border from layer 2, but then choose different elements to go on layer 1. And as I'm moving around, layer 2 stays put while I create new combinations sort of on the fly using that first layer. Now, as I'm clicking around, you're probably going to notice that down here at the bottom left, you have your monitoring area. So right now, anything that I'm clicking is going to your composition monitor, which is basically showing you what's going out to your LED wall or projector, your final output that you've set. But I can also use this preview monitor down here. Instead of clicking on the square sort of thumbnail for a clip in a layer, if you click on just this little title area, or this title bar underneath of a clip, you actually get the full capability of being able to preview a clip before it goes live. So again, for a worship setting, this is really powerful because it allows you to kind of get an idea of what's going to come next or what your next move might be before you send it to the wall. The next area that we'll look at is this area where it says composition and layer. And here you have basically parameters that you can dial in either composition wide or project wide or on a layer basis, right? So if I were to change the composition size, I can change the scale here, and the entire output on the wall behind me is going to change. Every single layer is going to be affected. I can undo that. And now if I just want to affect a single layer in that same way, I can do the same thing. So I could affect just layer 1 by going down here and changing the output of layer 1, or even the rotation, or the anchor point, or any of those parameters that you see here in this area. The next window that we're going to move to is the clip attributes area. And that's really where I do a lot of my sort of fine tuning or tweaking, is on that clip level. So in the clip attributes panel, you're going to see that we have this transport view. And you see here that this playhead is kind of moving slowly from left to right. And this is basically showing you where you are in that clip's length. Now, you can do a few things in this area that you can't do anywhere else. You can pause this layer. You can reverse this layer if you want to take something and play it backwards. You also have your speed parameters. Let's say you wanted to take this clip and you really like the look of it, but you just want to speed it up. Well, you can actually drag this speed and you can make it as fast as you want to go, get more of like a hyperspeed, hyperspace look. And then if you want to go back to, you know, the way it was before, you can just click this, type in 1, and we're right back to where we were. In this area here, we have the settings for the opacity of our clip. Again, this is going to be specific to this clip that I'm clicking on. So the opacity is not going to change for the rest of the composition, only for this clip that I'm applying these parameters to. You can also set a blending mode specifically to a clip, which allows you to create, you know, unique things without having to change an entire layer. And then scrolling down, we also have the clip scale properties, the clip rotation, and the clip anchor point. Moving over to the right here, we have sort of a browser panel. We have our Files tab, which allows us to browse through our hard drives, whether that's internal or external, and look for our media. We also have our Compositions tab, which allows us to pull from other Resolume projects that we've created. Next, we have our Effects panel, which allows us to apply special effects, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then finally, we have our Sources tab, which allows us to pull in additional sources like external cameras and even things like using siphons, which will allow us to connect to ProPresenter later on. All right, so I'm sure by now you can already see just how powerful of a tool for creativity this software really is for a worship service. The capability to be able to dial in all these parameters, to be able to layer footage, use blending modes, all of these things that we've covered so far, you know, these are really, really powerful tools. And now it's really just up to us how we use them to enhance the creativity and the capability in our worship services. So I figured I would just show you a couple of use cases of how we could actually put these things to work for us in that setting. So one of my favorite ways to use worship backgrounds, especially the intentional worship backgrounds that we've created for this purpose at Sunday Screens, is to be able to use sort of dynamic building elements to build off of a core look. So I'm going to show you this one column that we have set up. And you can see that by hitting column 1, we've triggered all 3 looks in this column. But what I love about this is that I can use these faders, as you can see, to fade down to a more sort of low energy, simplistic version of this base look, right? This is our Breaking Light collection from an amazing designer named Christian Scott. And he's designed them in a way where we can start with this look. Let's even start even lower than that, all right? So let's start at sort of, you know, the beginning of a song. Let's say that we've come from one song, we've faded out to black, and as the pad creeps up into a song 3 or something like that, nice and slowly, we can just introduce this really nice, soft, calm look that's not super overbearing, has a lot of negative space, allowing us to really just have a little bit more sort of darkness and sort of intimacy on the stage. And then let's say that as the song builds, as the dynamic of that song builds, as the band grows, we can start to introduce this second layer. So let's say we get to a chorus, and all of a sudden we're bringing up this second layer, right? A little bit brighter, a little bit more energy. And then let's go even further and take it into, you know, a chorus 3 and a bridge. And we want to take the energy up again without changing to an entirely different visual. We can actually fade this third layer up really slowly, and we've kept that same base look, but using Resolume and the ability to have layers here to create this beautiful distraction-free worship environment using these intentionally designed worship backgrounds. Now that's just one example because we're using, 3 different sort of dynamics of the same look. And some of our collections are really intentionally designed that way. But what if we want to sort of like take other elements and combine them to do that same thing, right? So let's start with column 2. And I'm just going to fade out the beginning here. We're just back to our sort of cloud layer on layer 1. Let's say we're fading into a song 1, right? This is kind of a higher energy thing. And we want to keep this same look without just, creating any distraction, but just introduce a little bit more dynamic. Well, then we could fade in something like this essential border, right? From our essentials collection. And just that white border adds a little bit of pop, a little bit of focus to the screen, kind of creates a nice sort of frame for our media without sort of having to click away to something different for the chorus. And then what if we want to go even further? Well, we can pull from our declarations collection, which has a whole bunch of, words like the name of Jesus and these different elements, or the word holy, like this declaration of the holiness of God. And we can actually use these elements and fade them in as a layer over top while we are keeping that base look of the clouds going. I'll show you one more and then we can move on to a little bit more details about Resolume, but I just love these, again, sort of creating these recipes out of the intentional ingredients that we have here. So let's, again, clear our deck. We'll kind of go back to the beginning and we start with this sort of like glowing sort of planet-like thing. We could bring in something like these star elements, kind of, bring that up without sort of creating any distraction. Let's say we get into a bigger part of the song, we could bring that border back from the Essentials collection. And then going even further, we could even fade into another look from the Spheres collection and kind of grow that look. We might even fade down the stars, right? And we've kind of just built this whole look based on this one sort of core idea. The one other creative capability that I mentioned earlier is this effects tab. Now there are a lot of effects in here, and again, with great power comes great responsibility. Using these tastefully is definitely the most important thing, especially in a worship setting. Remember, you just don't want to be distracting. But one of the ones that I would use the most often is tint. And you can see that if I apply this to this gradient layer that's playing right now, it kind of looks like nothing happened, but if I go down here, we see that this tint effect has been added to this clip specifically. Now I can open up this black parameter, and if I take this all the way down to black, you're gonna see that we kind of have now this black and yellow look, whereas before we had more of like an orangey red look. And if I take the white parameter, I can open this up, and if I take this all across, you can see that it's changing behind me and actually changing the color of this look. Now, the way that I like to use this most often is actually just creating a true black and white. And so you can see by adding this tint effect, we have now created a black and white element out of something that was previously color. And vice versa, we could go to something like this Jesus look here that is all black and white with sort of a cool transition happening there. I could apply a tint to a black and white layer. And even though this looks a little crazy right now, if I dial the black back to black and keep the white at something like this sort of like neon yellow, these might not be the colors that you want to pick, but look at that effect that's happening as a combination of applying a tint to a black and white layer and then allowing the essentials layer here with a difference blending mode to create this sort of inverse effect. So again, creative possibilities are endless. You definitely have to use a lot of responsibility with all the power that this software gives you, but I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of what some of those options could be. All right, so you might be watching this and by this point be like, great, I'm sold. This is clearly a very creative tool. Awesome. But how am I gonna run lyrics while I'm doing all of this? It's just me, there's only enough team to kind of like handle this. Well, I can actually show you how we're gonna connect all of this into ProPresenter using something called a digital siphon. And this is where things get really powerful, so that even if you are a one-person team on a laptop like the one here, you can actually run all this stuff while running lyrics in ProPresenter. And to do that, it is super, super simple. So you're literally just gonna go up to the Arena Output tab here in your settings, and you're gonna go down to Texture Sharing Siphon. So now that your output is set to this siphon, you can go and open ProPresenter, and we've got an instance pulled up here. And we're gonna go to the ProPresenter settings and go to inputs. And right here, you're gonna see this pulled up, but if it hasn't already, you just hit video, hit the plus sign next to this video, and it's gonna pull up this list of inputs that you could actually pull from. Now, if you've clicked that siphon in Arena, you're gonna see that it's now pulling up that option as a device for your inputs. You can click that and hit the X button. And then down here in this bottom tab, if you click on video inputs, and then this plus sign right here, you're gonna see that input 1 comes up as an option. And now when we click this input 1, because it's set to the Arena siphon, when we click this, now the content is here in ProPresenter and on the wall behind us. So once that's set, we can very simply just start adding our lyrics. And you can see that here in ProPresenter and on the wall, these lyrics are now playing very easily, right? So this is a crazy, helpful tool. And again, it kind of goes back to that question, like, do I have to choose ProPresenter or Resolume? Well, it's really both. If you use this siphon tool, you actually get the best of both worlds with the full creativity of Resolume and the ease of lyric playback and media playback from ProPresenter. I'm gonna show you how you can make that connection even easier in a second using a MIDI controller. But before we do that, I wanna show you one more point of connection that could be really cool for some creative ideas, whether that's using a FaceTime camera on your laptop or using an entire video stream as an input. So just as an example today, I'm gonna go into our sources tab, and you can see that FaceTime camera is here as an option. Now I can pull this into a layer 1, and you can see that when I trigger this column, you're actually gonna see me on the screen here, and you can actually use this camera, right? So I can do all the same things that I would have done to any of our other clips. I can scale this up, which is creating some crazy feedback behind us, obviously. But I can also do things like blend this camera feed with other visuals that I've created. So let's take that border, copy it over, and now when I trigger column 11 and turn up layer 2, you can see that that border is on top of me. I can even take something like this glitchy element, and I can now use this on top. And if I maybe pivot my camera a little bit, you're gonna see how those visuals are now on top of my video, and I can change the blending mode to anything that I like to really, create some interesting effects, whether that's something more abstract. So obviously there's a lot of creative capability, and you could go really crazy with this like we are doing right now. But the point is that you can connect camera sources to this for some really, really powerful effects. Especially when you start thinking about how to mask those things or apply, even like a black and white filter or place this, video stream within a stained glass arch or something like that. You get a ton of really creative, capability from this portion of using video inputs. So far, we've done a deep dive into how you can use Resolume for creativity and connection. And the final thing I want to touch on is the added control that it gives you when you're using something like a MIDI controller. And I've got one set up right here. This little MIDI controller right here is called the Korg Nano Control 2. I got it on Amazon for like 75 bucks, super cheap, but just gives us so much control over Resolume. And you can see that I've already got it hooked up here and mapped to our software. You can see here that as I'm now fading on these physical layers, we're actually seeing a change here in the software. So as I fade down layer 1, you can see that layer 1 is fading, both in Resolume and on the screen. And then layer 2, it's all kind of, synced up to different layers. Mapping this is extremely easy. So once your MIDI controller is connected via USB to your computer, all you have to do is go up here to Shortcuts, Edit MIDI, and it's gonna bring up this, range of different parameters that could be controlled by your MIDI controller. Now, the first thing that I like to do, and I learned this all from my good friend Ben Crossan, who taught me how to use this. These are his shortcuts that I absolutely love to use. So this is what I recommend. But again, you could map it in whatever way makes sense to you and your team. But I like to use this X, Composition X, which to clear everything, take it to black. I like to click on this. And once you've clicked that, it's going to sort of wait for a command on your MIDI controller to map it to, right? So now that I've clicked that, I'm gonna hit the stop sign here on this MIDI controller. And you can see that that is kind of changed here. You can see that composition disconnect all is now mapped to this MIDI parameter. And I'm going to keep going down the line and sort of mapping this to different points on this controller. So the next thing that I really want to be able to do is use these faders to control our layers. So I can actually click on this fader for layer 1. And when I toggle and move this fader on the MIDI controller on the first slot, we now see that this has changed, and now I have control over the first layer using this first fader on the controller. I can continue to go down the line and do that for layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and so on and so forth. And I can do that for as many layers as I have capability on this MIDI controller. Another thing that I like to do is map the columns to a button so I can trigger an entire column for maybe an entire new song, right? So if we click on column 1, we can then hit this R button on the controller, and that's gonna trigger column 1. Column 2, it's gonna be this R right here, and just go down the line. Just kind of making sure that everything is lining up with the corresponding point on your controller. And now when I get out of this by going back to shortcuts and edit MIDI, we're gonna have the, sort of our normal view with none of those, crazy teal overlays. But now I have full control over my situation here. So if I trigger column 4 that has all 4 of these layers, you can see that now I can completely control everything physically using this MIDI controller. And because this has faders, it allows me to really gradually change the look of things over time in a very subtle way, but all on the go, all live. Gives me a ton of creative control to be able to listen to the band, feel the moment that's happening in worship, and respond accordingly. And the beautiful thing about having this MIDI controller set up and having that physical control is that now I can switch back over to ProPresenter. And as the song builds, I can be selecting lyrics with my right hand here and going through lyrics, knowing that just down the line, I can start fading things up with my left hand to change the look on the screen of the visuals while still being fully dialed into what I need to do for lyrics. And so again, this is just such a powerful, amount of control that it gives you, even as a one-man band with a single laptop or whatever it may be, to be able to control multiple things at once and have that nice slow fade instead of like a hard cut or a big change. So that really allows you to have full control over all of those creative elements that we've previously talked about. And man, I just love using this tool. All right, I know we covered a ton of ground today on a brand new software. I hope you're not too overwhelmed. Again, this is such a powerful software, and I love that you can download it for free and play with it, before you ever decide to purchase. So do that for sure. One more quick note, when you go to the Resolume website, you're gonna see both Avenue and Arena. Arena does have some advanced features that some churches may be able to utilize, things like SMPTE and mapping and things like that. But for the majority of churches, Avenue is gonna be just fine, and you'll save about $400 going that way. Also, Resolume runs a 50% off sale every single Black Friday. So if you are interested in purchasing and you have the patience to wait, that's a great time to buy. And then any of the visuals that you saw on the screen behind us are all available at sundayscreens.com. I'll leave a link in the description. And you can even download a free sample pack with 5 free worship backgrounds to use at your services this weekend, whether that's in Resolume or ProPresenter or any other software. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more like this. We're going to be diving even further into Resolume and other sort of worship background tips for your church. And we'll see you guys in the next one.